All right, and welcome. This is the Aquarium Insider Podcast with your host. My name is Dan Connor, and today I'm stoked to be talking with Kerri from ScienceGal Aquatics, and today's talk is going to be a lot about guppies. So, Kerri, thank you so much for agreeing to do this with me. Very excited for this. How's everything going? How was Aquashella, I guess, is a good way to start it.
Thanks for having me and inviting me. This is awesome. Aquashella is fantastic. It always goes by so fast, and it's a blur. There's so many people you get to talk to. There's so many people you get to meet every single time. There's new faces, new conversations, new tips, new things to see and do. And it's always a new town for me here. It seems like even Chicago was in a different place. So I got to see some new places in Chicago because I don't venture out too much.
Same. I'm kind of a homebody. I'm pretty introvert. Yeah. I'm a homebody, and I'm like, man, I just already got to go to these places, meet new people. And I was like, man, this is a cool little show. I got to go to the Orlando one, got to meet you, meet a few other people that did this. And I'm like, man, I got to explore some more of these. So it's on my to-do list.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
Awesome. Well, for anybody who doesn't know, would you mind introducing yourself? Tell them about yourself, what you do, and then maybe what kind of fish you've been keeping and that sort of thing.
Yeah, sure. I'm Kerri with ScienceGal Aquatics, and I have been keeping fish my whole life. I don't really have a memory without a fish tank in my life. And I started out with guppies. That was the first fish that my parents let me keep by myself in my room and take care of. But my dad had a 30-gallon aquarium in the living room, and that was the thing that me and my dad did together. We went to the fish store, and he let me pick out whatever was cool, and we brought it home, and it somehow worked in that 30-gallon tank. But now I mainly do keep live bears downstairs. I have a fish room in the basement, but upstairs is my larger tanks. I have a silver arowana, and hopefully I have a 75-gallon, but I moved the goldfish that were in there outside to the pond. So nice. I have a goldfish and koi pond and mosquito fish and white clouds and guppies outside too. So it's a little bit of everything. But guppies, they'll always be special. They'll always be special.
Man, lots of questions. Well, let me go ahead and start off asking this to you. I kind of asked, this is kind of like my first question I asked a lot of people. What is a tip you would give a new hobbyist if they wanted to start keeping, and I'll actually keep it specific to guppies because I think that might be an important starter point. So what do you think would be a good tip for them?
If you're brand new, patience, really. Even if you're not brand new, patience. And if it's your first tank, get it set up first, let it cycle, take your time, learn about the nitrogen cycle, because I didn't know that at first, and it would have made my life a lot easier. But Patience, take it one step at a time. It's not something that you can rush into. It's a hobby that lasts a lifetime. You'll always be a fish keeper, so there's no need to rush through it in one day. Don't get your tank and your fish and everything. And it's exciting. You want to, but just one step at a time. Patience.
Awesome.
It's still something I'm learning too.
I don't know. I feel like my patience have gotten thinner over as older I get. I'm like, I don't want to wait as long. And then Amazon came along and I don't want to wait at all for anything. And I'm like, why am I doing? Oh my God, when I'm breeding fish, it's same thing. So I definitely
learned you can order fish in the mail, I really have to learn patience. But it is something that works better with fish tanks if you take your time.
Oh my gosh. Well, I have a question about that in a minute. I was going to ask you. So for guppies, what are your favorite strains right now? What do you like? What do you think looks cool?
I'm kind of digging more of the Inler wild type, even though there's a big debate if it's guppy, not guppy, but to me, it's all cool. But I used to like the bigger tails, and I still like the bright colors, but there's something about the little bit smaller Inler type that I just find so fascinating right now.
Yeah, I agree. I've, to be honest, Inlers were pretty new to me up until maybe the last I think 2 years or so. And they're nice. They're a smaller version. They still sit in the same part. They're still pretty active, but they still got great color. And I don't know. I think they're fun to look at. So I was like, Inlers are a new one. So I think they're pretty cool.
Yeah, I really dig them. They're just different enough that you have to keep them.
All right. I was thinking about this today. What do you think are some pitfalls for people who wanted to keep these fish? What are some issues, or you think any problems they might run into if they were keeping them today and they were brand new to the hobby?
My main thing was I just wanted fry all the time. And sometimes you get fry all the time and sometimes you don't. They say you can get them once a month, but sometimes you just don't. So if you're in it to breed and strictly breed them, or if you just want to see fry all the time because you like fry, that was something I had to kind of learn. Each one is different. Each female's a little different. Sometimes you get fry all the time and just sometimes you don't. It just depends. And I just assumed all guppies females threw fry every 30 days, you know, and sometimes they don't. So, but it's still fun.
Yeah, no, I definitely, that's a good point. I mean, I think a lot of people should probably look at guppies and be like, hey, you're probably, if you have some males and females in here, you're going to probably have some babies at some point, and maybe think about what that looks like and how that might work and see them all growing up. I think is like, that's the fun part, right? That's the fun part of keeping them. So that's pretty.
Sorry.
No, you're good. You're good.
I have noticed though that when I started with live plants, I never had live plants until probably 2 years ago. That really upgraded everything with my guppies. I had some plastic decorations and some rocks here and there before, but adding live plants changed everything. I even think they're more colorful with the live plants. So there's just something about it that I just changed everything.
Yeah, I would agree. I used to use, I mean, they call it guppy grass, and that's always been helpful in like spawning and stuff like that. I don't know. Everything I know is anecdotal of just stuff I've seen. So it's just like, oh, that looks like a good idea. Let's add this. It looks like, I don't know, seeing the babies on the backdrop of some of the grass and stuff, I think looks pretty cool. And I don't know, it makes sense. So I don't know. And I like that.
Another thing, I guess now that I'm talking about it, is I went through a phase where I was kind of more obsessed with chasing numbers too. I had to have everything just perfect, but now I've kind of just backed off and just let my water be. I use water conditioner and a little bit of root tabs here and there, but I've kind of just backed off with all of that, and I've had much better luck. So just kind of work with the water you got and go from there. And then once you do get fried, those second generation in your water that's born will do better than the parents.
That's a good point. You know, a lot of people, listening might come from all different types of water, hard water, soft water. And it's all going to be a little bit different for everybody. Yeah. And I think once you get the fish more acclimated to your tank, especially once they're breeding in that, their water, I think it's going to be a lot better for those fish at least. So,
yeah. And I feel like going from soft water to hard water is a little bit easier than hard water to soft water. But I have liquid rock for water, so hardness is not a problem.
Same. We are well water, so we're on a well, and our well water is like 8.5.
Yeah, I had well water growing up, and I don't have it anymore, and I miss it. I didn't even appreciate it when I had it till it was gone.
You never know till it's gone, I guess.
I know.
All right. Let's talk about, I guess, like some basic care questions of like what do you like in certain situations for guppies? So like if you're going to put guppies in an aquarium, do you have like a minimum you would put in X amount of gallons? Do you like them in a specific type setup? What do you like?
In a 10-gallon, I usually do with a trio. So I'll have 2 females to a male in a 10-gallon. If I have a 20 long, I might try to get a few more females and try 2 males. But that's usually about my limit, no matter in the tank size, because I kind of want them to reproduce. Right. And then every so many generations, I'll take them out and put them in a different tank. And then, especially, I don't know if you can see it, but I have a 55 above my head, and that's my community mutt tank. And so every couple generations of whatever's in another tank, I'll add them to that 55 to kind of strengthen up that line. But I try to add a few of the same strand when I can see it again, just to kind of help with the genetics. Because if you don't add, I feel like if you don't add them every so many generations, something new, it just kind of eventually you'll hit a spot where you'll get a bunch of fry, and then you won't have as many. It kind of crashes a little bit. So if I can see it again, if not, if I notice that, I'll just stick the whole thing into my community tank of guppy only aquarium and see there is something about like a 55 or a 75 gallon tank full of guppies and plants that's just beautiful. So hopefully someday that's what that tank will grow into.
I actually like that. I like the smaller community fish in a bigger tank if you've got a bunch. There's something about big, like small fish in a big tank, and especially with plants. The plants look great in your tank, and like from what I can see in the back, what are those, by the way? I can almost tell.
That is, what is that? That is, I have jungle val and vallisneria in a lot of my tanks. So
nice.
That's the hardest part about plants is remembering what you got.
Oh my! I'm not a plant guy. Like we bring in plants here and there, and I'm like, man, if I gotta know the name of every one of them, and they all look very similar. Especially when you start getting to just like some of the different type of swords. I'm like, all right, I know they have different shaped leaves, but these look really similar. I'm like, all right.
I've run into the problem where if I see a cool plant, I'll buy it. I don't care what it is. I just like it and I want it. And sometimes you need CO2 and I don't have CO2. So I give it a shot. But if I can get a cool new plant, I will try it. I will try it the best I can. I went down the rabbit hole on aquarium plants and I like it.
I agree. I like a nice planted aquarium is probably, I don't know what beats it. Like I've always had cichlid tanks most of my life, for my personal tanks. And it's always just like one big rock structure in the middle. And I'll have like something that circles it or something like that. But man, when I started doing these, I like the nano setups for planted aquariums because they're a little easier to maintain. Like, something like, anything short of a 30 gallon, I guess I like planted in. So it's just I don't know. They're fun. They're interesting. I think it feels like things interact more. Just the way I look at it. I guess maybe it's my own. It's definitely my own bias for sure, but it's something different.
Every tank I look at is my new favorite tank.
That is for sure. Well, let me ask you this because it's going to lead into the next question I had for you. I know you talked about. I guess this one's more about decor and stuff. Do you have a preference of any kind of like? Outside of the plants, like any kind of hardscape you like to put in the tanks or any substrate you prefer with this over anything else or just something you like right now?
I've been digging sand lately. I've been really liking the sand. And if I feel fancy that day, I try to attempt to escape a tank. I'll put a little bit of fluval stratum underneath the sand and kind of cap it with the sand a little bit. Yeah. I don't know if that does anything, but to me, I feel like it does a little bit, maybe. Yeah. And then I'll kind of sandwich. Once that kind of breaks down, I'll add fluval stratum, and then that'll break down. I'll add some sand. I never take anything out. I just add to it. But usually when I get substrate, I just go to the creek with the kids, and then they just pick out whatever's cool, and I somehow integrate it into the tank. I bought a couple times. I bought some dragonstone and I brought it home, but I'm still trying to get the whole aquascape pretty thing down.
Same.
I usually just kind of put it in and that's where it's at. But these tanks I've seen lately these aquascapes are amazing and I would like to try. But usually I just go to the creek and see whatever, or the river, whatever the kids pick out. And then it's something kind of might look kind of plain, but it's special. It's got memories with the kids that's this tank we got that from. And so, but I like sand and I didn't think I would. And it's not as hard to clean as I thought, but a little bit of everything, honestly. I don't have like a standout favorite. They all seem to work. Nice.
Now, on the sand part of it, do you think it's harder to clean or take care of or no than like another gravel?
It's not as hard as I thought it was. You still have to pay attention. You have to kind of hover slightly. And sometimes I'll kind of swirl a little bit above the sand to kind of kick it up a little bit. But it's not hard at all. I thought you would lose like tons of it. But if you're like digging the aquarium back down there, then yeah, you will. But it's generally not that difficult. And I've stopped over. I used to clean and aquarium vac my tanks all the time. Anytime I saw a speck, I would clean it out with an aquarium vac. And I've stopped. And I know it doesn't look the prettiest, but with the plants and the guppies and some of the shrimp I have in there, they enjoy it and they breed a little bit better with some gunk in there. So even though it's an eyesore to me, I've kind of backed off. And I'll water change, but I won't aquarium vac, but like every couple of times. I'll just take out some water, but I won't necessarily clean the substrate nearly as often. And that's really helped because I was over cleaning drastically.
I think that's a good point for a lot of people is like, sometimes you just got to let it run its course as long as, you've got a good balance of everything working on. If you start messing with things, it's almost like, don't fix what's not broken type thing, right? Don't do that. So relax a little bit, enjoy the aquarium some more. Don't sit there and think you're going to test it every 36 minutes. Be like, oh, my water quality is shifting on me, you're doing those sort of things. So that's good. That's good to point out. Well, that does lead me into my next question. So you talked about, you do water changes, but you only vac, once every other time. How often do you water change typically?
I'll take 10 to 15% out every week, once a week. And that I used to take 50, like I used to water change and clean drastically. But now about once a week, I'll take 10, 15% out of whatever size tank it is, just a little bit. And then every other 1 or 2 times, I might take 20% out with an aquarium vac just to kind of lightly graze over if there's something that really needs to come out. But if I clean once a week, I don't take as much out. If I do like once a month, I might take a little bit more out at a time. But usually a smaller water change works better for me once a week.
Yeah. That's a good, I try to stress to most people, this shouldn't be, don't make this the all encompassing second job. Make this something easy, keep it easy. Don't overcomplicate this to where you're almost working at it. And you're like, you're not going to enjoy the hobby if you're just working at it 24/7. You got to take some time back and just enjoy what's going on and do a little bit of maintenance, make sure nothing drastically goes wrong, but don't make it a second job type thing. So I think it's a good
and
point.
I've learned that if I turn my lights off properly and I don't overfeed and only feed a little bit, I don't need to do the water changes if I have more plants in the tanks. They don't need my help.
Yep. That's a very good point. Having planted tanks helps with, not needing water changes as often. But how many fish you have, and all sorts of things are gonna play into that. But all that's gonna help make it easier in the end for you keep it in an aquarium. So I think it's a good point. Well, let me ask you this. So you're in the middle of the country, whatnot. For temperature for your fish tanks, do you run individual heaters or do you heat the room?
I used to run, and I still have individual heaters in most of the tanks, but since I've moved the Guppy live bear tanks in the basement, it maintains temperature pretty well. It's usually, no matter what, around about 70 to 72-ish down here.
Yeah.
The tanks upstairs, the Silver Arowana tank, I have a heater up there because it's in a room that used to be a garage. Now it's a dining room, and it gets a little colder in the winter up there. But I used to have a heater in every tank that I had. And some of these tanks just don't need it. They don't. I'm lucky that they kind of fall into a temperature that works. They're not too hot. They're not too cold. I used to try to keep them as close to 78 as I possibly could, but they probably stay on an average closer to 75. Just depends, because sometimes it's cold and sometimes it's hot. So as long as I hit around about 72 to 78, I know it's kind of a roundabout answer, but somewhere in that magical zone, the fry are happy and the adults are happy. So it gets kind of cold here in the winter and it gets hot in the summer, but since it's in the basement, it helps tremendously with that issue.
And I bet that helps with the electric bill when you're running all those tanks too. So that's super helpful.
I just can't stand plug-in. It's the plugins. I can't stand to have that many plugins plugged into that many things, and it drives me nuts. So I was trying to figure out a way that would solve that problem, and moving it down here did.
That's great. Yeah, that's man. I just think to myself, if I was going to put up 10, 20 tanks, and I had to plug in for this, and I had to plug in for my light, and I had to plug in for the filter, and then I might need more filters. I got to plug in more. No, absolutely not. That would, the wires alone just I'm
was
not
too
OCD
much.
or incredibly organized like that, but that would bother me to
It
no
was
end. I don't
awful.
think I could do it.
Yeah, because I felt like every tank needed its own filter, heater, and light, and that's just too much. So I was trying to come up with clever ways where I could make it work, like buy a bigger light, and it would cover 2 tanks, so that would take at least one plug-in away, and it's still a work in process. Like it's still a work.
It's always going to be too. It's always going to be, well, this might make it a little bit easier. This could be a little bit more efficient. This could be a little bit better. XYZ.
Yeah, and about the time you think you got it, then you see something, you're like, oh my gosh, I want to do it this way.
Oh, this is a new thing. This makes my life easier. This new product, XYZ. No, I hear you. I feel like I live that every day. I'm like, man, I want to make this better today than I did yesterday. What works, what sounds good. So I think that's a good point. Well, let me kind of ask you this for keeping guppies. We mentioned temperature, basic maintenance. What would you, because this is probably the most common question most people would ask, is what would you keep with guppies? What do you think is a good tank mate for guppies?
Anything that doesn't have a very large mouth that isn't on the aggressive side. So like no cichlids. I wouldn't recommend cichlids. Like
nope,
angelfish. You can try it, but I wouldn't recommend it. You can stick with certain like neon tetra. You could probably do like some CPDs maybe. Swordtails if they're not too aggressive. Platies, mollies would work okay. Usually I keep shrimp. Plecos are okay. Just anything that's a little bit on the more peaceful side that doesn't have a very large mouth. Like maybe some cherry barbs. I've never kept them, but I've seen them, and they always seem like they'd be kind of peaceful. I've tried a dwarf neon gourami once, and it seemed okay. There's quite a few options. Just nothing too aggressive, nippy, or on the cichlid side. Yeah,
that's for sure. Definitely no cichlids. Oh, Corridor's cat. That's my favorite. Only because there's so many. They're so diverse as far as like what they look like. They're all just sort of seem happy, whatever they're doing. That's probably my favorite fish. And they just swim in different parts of the water, so it's not like they're ever going to worry about them anyway.
It when you can utilize the bottom level for some certain things, and then the guppies are kind of a little bit of everywhere. They don't stick at one level, but I like to utilize the bottom substrate for some, especially shrimp. I'm all about the shrimp right now, but I've had some panda corridoras that were really fun with the guppies for a while.
Nice. Now for the shrimp, you're talking about like the neocardina.
Yeah,
shrimp?
the neocardinas, or however you properly say it. I haven't been brave enough to try the caridina ones, but the neos I am so fascinated by. They're more entertaining and lovely than I ever expected.
Shrimp are definitely a fun thing to watch, especially you can get down there. I like to take my camera and zoom in and watch them just sort of like net stuff and whatnot, because I can't see that well.
How much I was going to enjoy them. I had no idea. They are amazing.
Oh man. Yeah, I like keeping guppy, shrimp, corridor cats. Those are probably my favorite, to be honest. I could have that tank set up every day, and I would never be bored of that.
I know. I'm not.
Let me ask you this, because this probably happens, I'm sure, to a lot of new fish keepers. They get their fish, they bring them home, they went to the pet store, they come home, and then their fish aren't looking so hot. They've got some sort of problems. How do you troubleshoot, like if they've got ick or something like that? What is your go-to remedy to hopefully handle that, and how would you deal with that, I guess?
I've tried all kinds of things in the past, and usually with ick, it just kind of looks like they have salt stuck to them, or sugar or something. But usually, I'll put them into my quarantine tank, which is a 10-gallon tank, and I've had the best luck with turning up the temperature. That's the one time a heater is useful with a thermostat or an adjustable piece. Yep. And I'll crank it up to like 80, 82 if I can, and put like tablespoon, teaspoon. I don't measure. It's just like a small little handful in there. And I'll water change every other day and then add a little bit more salt until it's gone. And then I have been adding a little bit of stress coat and some catappa leaves to the mix in that. But I've used all kinds of things. I've used ICX and all kinds of things in the past, but that concoction just works for me. That's what I've had the best luck. No matter what I see, I just stick them in that concoction of a little bit of salt and catappa leaves, then stress coat, and go from there. Water changes.
I think that's a solid remedy. Cause I mean, the salt's going to take care. They can't live in a saltier solution. Right. And then and when you add the heat, it's going to end up speeding up that life cycle, and it's going to just eliminating it quicker. Hopefully it's gone relatively quickly, but man, so
it's always in your tank. It's just if it's activated, you might not see it, but it's always there.
It's not going anywhere. And some fish are more prone than others. I think at least ones that I've dealt with and seen, I'm like, oh, temperature dropped 3 degrees. It's just immediate. It's just like immediately happening. So. Yeah.
And because I've gotten in this bad habit of just kind of eyeballing things and going by like, if it comes in a packet, sometimes I'll just like 10-gallon, 1 pack, whatever the directions are. Sometimes I just don't feel like I do it right. I feel like I either overdo it or underdo it. And if I add just a little bit of salt at a time and just water change and add that, I have much better luck with survival.
And that's what matters, because that's what you're trying to do. It's working.
Yeah.
Don't change it. It's just what we just said earlier. Don't fix what's not broken. If it works for you, don't change it. And I think that's a solid remedy. That's
I've
gonna work
always used
most of the time.
Sorry to interrupt.
Oh no, you're good. You're good.
I always use the aquarium salt for that. I haven't tried the marine salt, but if I notice like something that's bloated in a guppy, I use the salt that's, I don't know what it's called, but it's the magnesium. It's got magnesium in it. I'll use a little bit. Epsom salt. I'll use a little bit of that salt if I notice one that's just swollen and I know they're not pregnant.
Yeah.
It's just like they're constipated. I try to use that, but overall I just generally use aquarium salt for things.
All right. Yeah, I think that would work. I mean, those sound like, very good remedies for dealing with any sort of issues, especially if you're dealing with guppies. And guppies are relatively hardy anyway. They don't have a ton of issues, which is really nice. Yeah. But if they do, everyone listening, this is a good little remedy to pick up. And so write this down. All right. So we talked about caring for guppies, a little bit of background. So let's talk about, in case anybody wants to start breeding some guppies. So what's your ideal set them up to get them to breed? Do you do it in a smaller tank? Do you use different ratios, pairs, trios? Everyone has their own method. What do you think? What works for you?
I always use more females. Even if I have one male, if I have 3 females, I'll use 3. If I have 2 females, I'll use 2. But I won't use 1 if I can help it. If that's all I have, that's all I have. But usually I just use more females to males, and I'll start with 1 good, healthy male. If I can, ideally. But once the tank populates, then it's kind of hard to. I usually don't pick out males or females. I just let it go. But starting out a tank fresh and I'm trying to breed, I just add more females to males. And I'll add a little bit of plants so the females will have a little bit of chance to rest, because the males won't give up. They'll always chase. Yeah. And if they're not stressed, if they're not got some kind of tank mate and that's chasing them, or you just have them like in a tank by themselves where there's no stress, sometimes they'll take their time. They'll kind of do more of a dance and more of a court type thing where the male's just kind of chasing and you can see his little dance. But if they have a little bit of stress, or they have some tank mates that's kind of bugging them a little bit, it seems like they're more apt. They want to mate now because they want their genes to go and they want them babies in case they might get eaten. They kind of speed it up a little bit, but I don't recommend like stressing your guppies to get babies either,
Yeah.
But I have just kind of noticed from because that's what I did with my undergrad. I stressed some tanks to see if it manipulated the fry count, and the ones that were stressed had smaller fry more often, and the ones that were stress-free had bigger fry, lesser amounts, and took their time. There was more of like it, and their coloration was really pretty. They had brighter colors because they were stress-free. They had nothing to worry about.
Wow.
And the ones that were stressed, their colors were a little muted, and they just wanted to get their genes gone, like out there in case they got eaten. So they had tons of fry. They were smaller. Not all of them lived. They were a little bit, I wouldn't say they were as healthy, but it still was an interesting. That was my undergrad for my biology degree.
Wow. That's fascinating. Mm-hmm. That's good to know. That's good to.
Yeah, it was interesting. I didn't really know what to expect, but it was interesting result. I don't recommend, again, don't stress your guppies out, but it was interesting. I had 2 sand tanks and 2 gravel tanks, and they were all 5 gallons, and 2 were 1 sand and 1 gravel stressed, and 1 sand and 1 sand and gravel was not stressed, if I can remember. And it was interesting. I made it was a little clay fish on a stick that I would swim in there to chase the guppies around a couple times a day to stress them, because I didn't want to put like an actual something in there. So
sure. Wow.
That's interesting. It was fun.
That's some interesting results. I'm fascinated by that. It's always good to know about little things like that, because that's a good little tidbit for people trying to set up some little breeding groups of some kind. So that's good to know.
Yeah.
Well, let me ask you this. So if you're selecting some guppies and you want to breed them, males or females, what are you looking for in, traits or their body shape? What do you look for when setting them up? Is there a preference, or is it just kind of like, these are cool? Like, anything specific you'd like to look at?
I just honestly, if they're pretty and they look healthy, chances are I'm going to buy them. But ideally, if they can't swim, if their tails are too long, I don't like it when their tails are too long and they're just kind of weighted down and they don't swim light, or if they look like the males are more on the bloated side, not really healthy looking. But usually, if I just kind of eyeball it. I've never been in like a competition or anything with my guppies. I'm more of just a hobbyist. If there's something that's catches my eye, then I like it. I
like it. And that's the way, I don't know. That's the preferred method for me, at least for little home projects and stuff. My wife likes to breed shrimp and stuff. So it's just I'm not trying to do anything crazy. Just, they look good. Let's put them in there. Yeah. Let's see what happens, and let's go and see what we get.
Especially if it's a line I haven't seen and it's there in person and it's for sale, chances are I'm going to try to get at least a trio.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, for I know we talked about temperature already for caring for the tank, but do you have to do anything different for temperature if you're trying to breed them, or do they breed in different temperatures year round for you typically?
I know when I was a kid, I didn't heat the tanks and the aquariums when I was little bitty, and the tanks got a little closer to 68 and they bred just fine. I keep the ones down here 72, 75. They breed just fine. I have guppies outside that go from really hot to cooler at night, and it's just a natural temperature swing, and they breed just fine.
That's awesome.
So I feel like the adults like it a little bit warmer, a little closer to 78 if you want the fry to come out a little bit faster. And I think the fry like it a little bit closer to 75 to grow out at a healthy. You don't want them to be, they grow probably faster at 80, but they're going to live a shorter life if you speed it up too fast. So 72, 78, maybe ideally if your tanks hit around there and it's just consistent. If it's that's just consistent temperature, then they'll be fine. But outside, there's a natural temperature just of the natural day to night, and they do just fine. It's whatever they're used to that's consistent, I think, is what you're looking for.
And that's good to know, because sometimes with some fish, if they're a little bit more picky or finicky, temperature seems to be a big thing that determines everything. And if guppies are going to be breeding at that's good news for people looking to breed something they've never bred before. And they don't have to worry about some crazy setup or water parameters. It's like, no, they're good.
It's not. They're pretty hardy. Now, I don't let them get below like a 65. I know I missed one female bringing them in from the summer tubs in the scoop, and I just didn't. It's hard to get them all in from the tubs. And there is a point where it is too cold and they just won't live. But I think if you keep it no colder than like 65, probably you should be good. But 68 is probably the coldest I would recommend. But even as long as it's consistent and it works for you and you're not seeing anything wrong, then it's working. So
and that's a good point, because I think they're just going to adapt if they're used to it, and they're still acting normal, and they're still eating, and they're still doing everything they're supposed to be doing. Like that's normal. So
that time you just first bring them home, probably that first few days is probably the most iffy. And the first few days that the fry are born are probably the most iffy. But if you can get through that few day period, you should be good.
That's good. That's really good to know. Well, I have a 2-part question because I forgot to ask it earlier. And it was, what do you feed the guppies? Like, do you have anything special food or just something you like? Do you feed flake or pellets or anything?
Whatever I can get my hands on that is on the smaller size. They do have a smaller mouth, so I'll keep it like... The Extreme Krill Flakes is one of my favorite. I use the Aquarium Co-op's fry food. That's a favorite. The First Bites, I think it's the Kerri First Bites is a favorite. The small, I think it's small breed bug bites, the mosquito larvae, because they are omnivores. So you want to feed they'll pick on algae, but you still want to feed them some mosquito larvae. And I know that the bug bites is bug larvae. I think it's even mosquito larvae. I mean, a little bit of honestly, get a hold of a new fish food, I'll try it. I've done the frozen bloodworms and the frozen brine shrimp, but I treat it more like a treat. I don't feed it, but like twice a month. I've hatched live brine shrimp, and they really like that a lot. The summer tubs, I honestly don't feed. There's enough. I don't even know what they are, but they're a little tiny itty bitty bug that kind of dances on the surface of the water, and I'll stir that up a little bit with just like my finger, honestly, just enough to get them dancing, and the guppies will eat them up.
Oh, I'm sure they're loving them summer
natural mosquito larvae outside. So, I mean, there's a wide range of foods and they're always nipping, they're always pecking at the bottom, they're always searching, but I usually feed a bunch of different stuff. I just feed a little tiny bit each day or a little tiny bit every couple of days. If I forget one day, it's not a big deal. Yeah. But every couple of days, every other day, just a little bit here and there, because I don't want to. I used to overfeed a lot, and you don't have to feed tons of food. Whatever they eat in like 15 seconds, 30 seconds, that's about enough. So
that's perfect. And we talked about here today, but definitely overfeeding is way worse than underfeeding your fish. I promise you, it's way worse.
I don't even know if fish would even have the opportunity sometimes, some fish, to eat every day in nature, like the bigger ones. So if they're a little hungry, then I don't want to starve them by any means, but you don't have to feed them there's some fish some fry you do have to feed. I think like discus, you have to feed 5 times a day, the fry. But guppies, you don't have to do that.
Guppies are pretty easy for that. Well, so feed them a bunch of, do you feed them anything differently if you're breeding them, or you just feed them at the same time, or you feed them more often or anything?
No, I just feed them the same way.
Okay.
And they breed. Guppies, if they usually, if you just put them together, they'll breed. So I don't. Occasionally, I might get a line that's a little harder to breed that I might even feed even smaller amounts a couple of times a day to see if I can kickstart it or kind of change. Because some tanks, I can put 2 tanks together and do this exact same thing on the same, and they still will have 2. One time the guppy might like this one, and even though it's the same, they might like this one. So I'll kind of switch them around, or if I have multiple males, I might put them in a tank by themselves and switch the male out and see if that might do anything, or maybe a female might switch that out. But typically, 99.5%, I just put them in a tank and make sure they're happy and they're fed and they will breed.
That is great.
It's like a really long answer to get to the point, but basically I don't usually have a problem.
No, that's great. No, I like that because it gives a little bit more added value to people looking like, hey, I want to breed some fish. And I think food's probably one of the most important factors when breeding fish. Is some of those fish are real picky, and to have something they can breed, relatively ease of use, not a whole lot of complications. It's just going to increase the likelihood of success, and I think that's kind of the point. So
I will have to say that the ones that I put outside, they just, no matter how hard I try in the fish room, the ones outside will always breed better. They always have more fry. They're more colorful, just generally more happy and healthy than any of the fish in the fish room. And I think it's just the natural food and the natural day to night cycle that I just can't recreate in the fish room. So
I would definitely agree. When I was like a kid, we used to do pineapple swords in big ponds, and the ponds, we had them in, they were the most beautiful fish I've ever seen. I've never seen one since then that's ever even touched the color of it, especially indoor ones or smaller ones. They don't have the color. And I'm like, I mean, I don't know what it is. I'm not that smart to figure that out, but I can tell you anything in a pond is always going to have more color than stuff that's grown inside. It's just
if
how
you
it
have
is.
the way to breed fish outside in a tub. Now, my white clouds and my mosquito fish and my koi pond, I leave all out all year, but my guppies and my rice fish, I think I'm going to figure out a way, because I think they're going to do better outside year round. But those guppies I do bring in. I do bring in the guppies during winter, but as soon as I can put them right back out, I put them right back out.
That's a good point. Well, let me ask you this, just because I'm curious. When do you typically bring your guppies in? So when's the stopping point says it's going to get too cold typically?
It seems like here in the last couple of years, we've had it like 60 on Christmas. So I feel like it's been longer and longer.
Yeah.
But being able to put them out has gotten pushed back too. So the whole kind of, now it's probably like June, July to probably safely October, November-ish, depending on the weather. It's usually, but I will look for, once it gets down colder to like below 70 at night, 68 at night, and it's starting before that first frost, I start checking the weather apps and like, okay, that's when I bring them in. I don't let them through that first frost of where I live. That's my point. But everything's kind of shifted later in the year. So
well, that's good to know. So before the first frost, if you got some stuff outside, bring them in.
Attention to my weather app. And once it starts that low 70s, high 60s, below that, then I start looking for it. If I can push it, I'll push it. But once I start looking for that first frost date, I'm like, okay, I got to get moving.
Time to move some fish.
Because I always leave it up. Like I'll scoop a little bit out and then I'll let it settle and then I'll go back and look, because there's always like that one you missed and you're like, so I always give myself like a day or two to like make sure they're all scooped out. Because sometimes it is kind of hard to see that they're all out and you miss one and you're like, dang.
That's a good point. Yeah. I mean, that's got to be difficult. I'm just thinking in my head, I'm like, how would I do that and make sure nope, I would definitely miss one. I'm not
it's
observant for stuff like that.
It's hard sometimes. It's
very hard.
Yeah.
All right. So we talked about anything for conditioning. We talked about food. Let me ask you this. So once they're kind of in their mode and they're breeding, how would you tell if the female is pregnant?
They will have a darkened spot, usually, by their anal fin, a gravid spot. It'll get bigger and darker. And then when they're closer to having the fry, they'll get really boxy. They'll just, they look uncomfortable and they just get really swollen. But usually if you don't want to go off a site, if they've been around a male, they're probably carrying fry at some point, because you can take the male out and the female can still have a couple batches of fry. So they can hold on to that and have refertilized themselves for a little bit. The fry count will usually get a little bit smaller over time when they do that. But if they've been around a male, chances are they're pregnant. But they'll grow to like a boxy look closer to delivery, but that dark spot on the bottom of their belly by that anal fin will grow. And if they're light enough, sometimes like I think it's the sunset guppy, they have like a white body and you can see the eyeballs of the fry and like you can see them. So
that's a good
usually
point.
Like they'll just have that, they just look uncomfortable, they look like they're about to pop, and that's usually a pretty telltale sign that your guppy is pregnant.
Well, that is a good, so look for the eye spots if they're a little bit clearer on the belly, a little bit more swollen in there, and been around a male. That's a good point.
Yeah.
So at least it's fairly obvious, I imagine. I'm hoping for this. People looking at them like, hey, just give them a little bit of time. And then, so once the female has the babies, do you do anything for them? I think we talked about it briefly in the food section, but do you do anything special for them once they come out?
I've done it a couple of different ways. In the past, I used to scoop out the fry and put them in another tank, and I wouldn't recommend that. If you want them to be in a different tank to raise up the fry, move the pregnant female before she delivers into that tank. And then once she drops her fry, move her back to where she's supposed to go. I would give her like a day, if you can to give her a rest from the males of that other tank, the original tank. But I feel like if you want to separate them, move the female into that grow out tank, let her drop her fry, then move her back. Now I don't do anything. I just let them drop the fry in the tank, and there's enough plants in there that they can usually hide. Chances are just naturally not all of the fry are going to survive, but if a heavily planted tank or if you have a grow out tank, you're going to have the majority grow out, but don't get discouraged if you just naturally lose some. Not all of them just naturally grow out. So I've done it a couple of different ways, but if you can have a planted tank and just naturally let them drop, let the strongest survive and let them grow out, that's what I feel like works best for me. But you can, whatever works best, that if it's working, keep doing it. But if you must move the female out, let her drop, then move her back.
That's a good point. And I think that makes that kind of qualms a little bit of what's going on, a little bit of stress going on, probably going to increase survivability a little bit, I think.
They're fry, they're just a little fragile in the beginning. And if you're moving them to a different even if, like I said, even if they're two tanks right next to handled the same, cared the same, they're still different. And that's the one time they are the most fragile. So you don't want to move them, whereas the females usually, she's going to be hardier, so she's just going to handle it better than those freshly born fry. But I've done it has worked. It's just try it, see what works, whatever has the best success rate for you, do it.
No, I think that's a good point. I mean, they're just born, they don't have a whole lot of idea what's going on yet. Their immunity is not really there, so giving them as less stress is probably going to be best case scenario. And then I know you touched on it briefly earlier, but do you feed them the fry food from Aquarium Co-op and mostly the fry, or what do you typically feed the fry?
Whatever I typically, like, being honest, is just whatever I feed the adults. I'll just do the last few seconds. I grind it in my fingers a little bit heavy, like a little bit more. But if I am really like attached and it was like my purple mosaic, I don't have very few. So the fry that I have, I want to try my dangest. I will drop some Co-op food, some fry food, or the first bites in there. But even I'll feed that stuff too as a meal to the adult. So it's kind of in the rotation naturally. So, but like the krill flakes, I'll feed them to the adults in the last few seconds. I'll grind it a little bit more in my fingers, but I spread it out throughout. I don't drop it in one spot. So it just kind of, they all have a chance to get to it.
Sure.
So.
All right. Well, that's been pretty good. Well, let me kind of transition to a small other segment. And for this segment, what I do is I take bits of pieces of the next. I'll ask you a question. I call it Yaka. I don't know what else to call it. It stands for Your Aquarium Questions Answered. It's basically a little bit more some generic questions that people are asking, and I make it its own separate clip, and then I use that to help also promote the podcast, which I think is kind of cool. So, and it's relatively generic, but this is probably some of the most common questions that people ask. And So let me go and ask those. I only have a couple. So the first one is, how long do guppies live? How long do you see their lifespan as that you have them for typically?
Good average 3 years. You can get a little bit less, a little bit more, but average probably 3 years for me, my experience.
I think that's good to point out. So if you're looking for guppies, you know, and you're buying them in the store and you're getting the bigger ones they might already be pretty old. They could already be like 2 years old, maybe even 2.5 years. And then like, oh man, my guppy died. What happened? Well, it could already been up there in age. And not everyone, you know, some will buy it, you know, just like everything. Some will die a little later. Some will die a little younger. Might not be any signs of disease or anything. It just might be, what happens. So
I do feel like my females live a little bit longer than my males do, but I've had some that live probably 5, like closer to 5. I'm not counting on the calendar, but I feel like I had them a heck of a lot longer.
Sure.
And they moved with me a few apartments in the past. And then I've had some that only made it a year, but typically I'll have a really good line for about 3 years before I notice it's starting to kind of dip down a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good. Yeah, I think that kind of translates in the right life anyway. You know, the male. I don't know. I always heard the male always dies sooner than the female in almost everything. I don't know how true that is.
They explained it to me in ecology class in college that the females, it takes more energy for females to create the eggs. So that's the reason the males are more colorful. They are more apt to get spotted by the predators because the sperm is they can produce that really quick, whereas the females, that's all they can produce, and that's all they can do. So that's the reason that the females are usually a little bit more muted in color and naturally, and the males are brighter because it's better for them to get eaten than the females. And then if the males get eaten, the females, they hold on to that sperm, and they have the ability to drop fry for a few generations without males to guarantee that line is. And they have more, usually if they have a batch of fry that's a bigger amount, they're lower on the food web. So they're going to get eaten more. So if you only have one baby, chances are you don't have very many predators. But if you have the ability to drop 200 fry at a time, you probably are a little bit lower on the totem pole, and the males are going to be more apt to get eaten. They're more, it's bad to say, but they're a little bit more disposable than the females.
No, that's
how they explained it in ecology class for just like the general food web, food chain stuff.
Yeah.
And you're like, well, that's kind of how you can judge it, by how many offspring they have, where they kind of land on the scheme of things.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I like that. I like that explanation. So that makes total and perfect sense. All right. So last question, because I only had a couple, and we talked about it briefly, was how long are guppies typically pregnant for?
They say 30 days, but I've had some guppies that I felt like they were never going to drop them fry. I promised they were pregnant and full of fry for months. And I was like, there's no stress. So they didn't have to drop them. And then I've had some that were pregnant and then something happened and they absorbed them, and we had to try again because those females didn't like it. So they say on paper 30 days. Yeah. But it's really dependent on that female that you have. Just if it's got some kind of tank mate that they don't like and they have the ability to drop fry, you might see a little bit more. But if they are just digging it and they don't have to, then they might hold on to them fry forever. So,
that's a very good point.
Don't be surprised. Like I've had guppies drop one fry, and then it took like a week later to see the other fry. And I was like, am I just going to have one? It doesn't happen very often, but I've seen it where they just dropped one or two, and then it took a couple of days for the rest. Huh. So they say, like I say, you'll read every 30 days, they have the capability of dropping a brood of fry or whatever the proper name is. Sure. But watch your female. Get to know that female. Each one's different, and they will drop them when they are comfortable and ready to.
So have some patience, people.
Have some patience. That's a long answer to say just get to know your fish, but
I like it. No, that's great. Well, I don't have any more questions. I didn't realize it was almost an hour. Like, I feel like we just started. So that was awesome. I did want to ask you, do you have any one I did want to mention, if you're listening or listening on podcast or watching this on YouTube, I'll have all of Kerri's contact and where you can find her in the description and show notes. So if you're looking for questions for her and watch her YouTube, all her contact information will be there. So Kerri, any last thoughts, last things we forgot to talk about, anything we should mention?
Enjoy your fish tanks. Take it one day at a time and go fish shopping. Pick out some cool guppies. And if you haven't tried guppies, give it a shot. They're great for beginners. And if you are an expert, they're great for experts too, because there's always, you can get as technical as you want or as carefree and just let them go and enjoy them, especially when they're feeding. Like when you feed them, they are so fun to watch. So they're peaceful. They're great for everybody.
All right. Yeah. Well, I think that wraps it up. So, Kerri, thank you so much. I definitely appreciate you doing this. And then I guess that's everything. I don't know how to end this. I've never been good at this. Yeah. So everyone have a good night. Take care.
Thanks. Bye.